It's October 1957 in a coal mining town in West Virginia, and a row of families is standing in their yards looking up. A small point of light is moving across the night sky, steady and strange, where nothing has ever moved before. It's Sputnik, the first satellite humanity ever put into orbit, and it is passing directly over a town that exists to dig coal out of the ground. Among the people watching is a teenage boy who has no interest in ever going down into that mine. He watches the light cross the stars, and he makes a decision that will change his life. He is going to build a rocket. He has no fuel, no plans, no idea what he's doing. His first attempt uses a flashlight tube and powder scraped from cherry bombs. It explodes and takes out his mother's fence. He does not stop. Neither do thousands of other kids across the country, all watching the same light, all having the same idea, all about to learn the same hard lessons. That boy's name was Homer Hickam. He would eventually work for NASA. But before that, he was just one of an entire generation of American kids who looked up at the sky and decided they were going to build their own way into it. This is the story of what happened next. Tell me in the comments if you remember the moment you first looked up. If you grew up with model rockets, the memories aren't visual first, they're physical. You remember the smell of spent engine smoke drifting across a field, sharp, sulfurous, a little sweet. You remember the cardboard tube in your hands, the balsa fins you'd glued on slightly crooked, the nose cone that never quite sat straight no matter how many times you adjusted it. You remember the launch pad, a thin metal rod sticking up out of the dirt, a little blast deflector, two alligator clips connected to a controller with a big red button and a safety key. You remember the countdown, counted out loud by whoever was holding the button, sometimes a parent, sometimes a friend, and the half second of nothing after ignition before the engine caught, and the rocket either screened straight up in a column of smoke, or just as often fishtailed sideways and corkscrewed into the weeds. You remember craning your neck, losing the rocket against the sun, and then the small relief of the parachute popping out, drifting somewhere it would take 20 minutes to retrieve. It was loud, it was smoky, and for $1 or $2 in engines, it was the closest thing to real spaceflight a kid could touch with their own hands. In 1958, Vern and his wife Vern Estes turned that machine into a business. A modest mail-order operation in Denver, Colorado called Estes Industries. In 1961, they moved the whole operation to a 77-acre tract of land outside Penrose, Colorado, a small town that would soon carry a new nickname. The growth was fast and it was real. As the U.S. space program captured the country's imagination, America's youth fell in love with model rocketry, and Penrose, Colorado became widely known as the model rocket capital of the world. What had been a chaotic backyard fad with steel pipe and stump remover was becoming an organized industry built around one core idea: a small, reliable, factory-made engine that any kid could buy, load into a paper and balsa rocket, and launch safely from their own backyard. Vern didn't work alone in shaping the hobby's safety culture either. He helped found the National Association of Rocketry and helped create the Model Rocket Safety Code, a set of rules that, remarkably, the hobby still follows today. The danger hadn't disappeared. It had been engineered down to something a parent could stand next to. The man who solved the problem wasn't a rocket scientist. He was the son of a fireworks dealer. Vern Estes grew up around the Estes family fireworks business, the first fireworks company listed in the Denver phone book. In 1957, a small Denver outfit called Model Missiles Incorporated had started selling some of the first dedicated model rocket engines. But by 1959, demand had outgrown what they could produce by hand, and they needed an outside supplier. Vern took on the challenge of mechanizing engine production and built a machine he named Mabel, capable of turning out a finished rocket engine every 5.5 seconds. He powered it with compressed air and hydraulics, specifically to avoid the sparks that electrical controls could throw off, because he was mass-producing small explosive devices, and a spark in the wrong place could be catastrophic. It was a strange, elegant solution, Instead of asking American kids to stop wanting to build rockets, build them a rocket they couldn't blow themselves up with. Mabel was the quiet hinge on which the entire hobby turned. Let's be honest about how this hobby actually started, because it's the whole point of the story. In the months after Sputnik, amateur rocketry exploded across the United States, almost literally. Kids and adults alike began building homemade rockets fueled with whatever they could mix in a garage: ground match heads, zinc and sulfur, powdered sugar and stump remover, sometimes cooked together with alcohol as a binder. Time magazine reported that all over the country, homemade rockets were fizzling, exploding, and, on rare occasions, soaring into the sky. It was not a safe hobby. The National Fire Protection Association called amateur rocketry extremely dangerous and recommended it be prohibited entirely until proper launch sites existed. People built rockets out of steel pipe with no recovery system that came down as fast as they went up. Injuries were common. Some attempts very nearly killed the kids who built them. The dream was real, and the danger was real too, and for a moment, it looked like the second thing might kill the first. Something had to change before regulators shut the whole idea down. And the change came from an unlikely place: a fireworks family in Denver, Colorado. Not every kid building rockets in 1958 had Vern Estes' factory to thank. Some of them had something just as important: an adult willing to take a chance on them. Back in that coal town in West Virginia, Homer Hickam and his friends, they call themselves the Big Creek Missile Agency, kept building, kept failing, kept getting in trouble. One early rocket landed dangerously close to the mine office and nearly injured workers, and Homer's father warned him never to launch on company property again. But their science teacher, Frida Riley, believed in what they were doing and encouraged them to keep going, even when the rest of town saw four boys playing with fire. They moved their launches to a clearing they called Cape Colwood in honor of Cape Canaveral, and over 3 years they launched dozens of increasingly capable rockets. They won a National Science Fair gold medal for a project called A Study of Amateur Rocketry Techniques. Every one of those boys eventually left the coal mines behind. Homer went on to work for NASA. It is almost exactly the story this entire hobby was quietly telling all across the country, one backyard at a time. So what did a kid actually get for $1 or $2? A small cardboard engine, about the size of a fat cigar, with everything sealed inside. Compressed black powder propellant for thrust, a clay nozzle to direct the exhaust, a time delay element for coasting, and the second charge of black powder to eject the parachute. All of it engineered so the rocket would not just go up, but come back down gently and survive to fly again. The rocket itself was the opposite of the homemade steel pipes from a few years earlier. Estes built its kits from paperboard tubing for the body and balsa wood for the fins and nose cone. Light, cheap, and crucially, safe to fail. If a fin came off, if the parachute didn't open, if the whole thing crashed nose first into a field, nobody got hurt. The materials themselves were a safety feature. Add a simple launch pad, a battery-powered controller with a safety key, and an instruction sheet, and the kid had everything they needed to put something into the sky on their own for less than the price of a movie ticket. Here's the truth that sits at the center of the whole story, the one that's easy to miss. The genius of Estes wasn't that it made something exciting. Plenty of kids were already finding rocketry exciting on their own with steel pipe and stump remover, and it was getting them hurt. The genius was making the exact same dream, watch something you built fly into the sky, survivable, repeatable, and affordable, without taking away what made it thrilling. A safe rocket still roars, it still trails smoke, it still occasionally corkscrews wildly off the pad and makes every kid on the field laugh and duck at the same time. Nothing about the safety made it boring. The engineering simply moved the danger out of the fuel and into the design. Fins that could be replaced, parachutes that could be repacked, engines that were tested to a known, certified amount of thrust. That is an unusually rare kind of invention, one that makes a thing both safer and better. And for the next 4 decades, two men nearly built an entire American childhood around it. By the mid-1960s, the timing could not have been more perfect. Estes pioneered real technological advances during this period: multi-staging, rocket-boosted glide recovery, and increasingly accurate scale replicas of America's actual rockets, including the Redstone, Mercury, and Atlas boosters that were carrying real astronauts into space. A kid could walk into a hobby shop and buy a model of the exact rocket they just watched on the evening news, then build it, paint it, and launch their own version of it from a cow pasture down the road. The company even staged a genuine spectacle. On the last night of 1969, just months after the moon landing, Estes sponsored an indoor launch of a model Saturn V at halftime of the Bluebonnet Bowl, inside the Houston Astrodome. It's hard to overstate how strange and wonderful that moment was. A stadium full of people watching a scale model of the very rocket that had just carried men to the moon lift off indoors under a roof to the cheers of a football crowd. The real space program and the backyard hobby had become, for one night, the same show. So tell everyone in the comments, what was the first rocket you ever launched, and did it come back in one piece? Here's the claim, and it's backed by the people who lived it. A model rocket wasn't just a toy that went up and came down. Building one taught a child hands-on the basics of aerodynamics, stability, and structural design. Why a rocket needs fins, why weight distribution matters, why a nose cone shape changes how high you fly. Launching one taught patience, procedure, and the simple discipline of a countdown and a safety checklist before anyone pressed the button. Vern Estes himself helped found the international rocketry community that grew up around the hobby, sending his own family to compete at international meets in the 1960s. A generation of engineers, including some who would go on to work in the actual aerospace industry, will point to a cardboard Estes Alpha as the first rocket they ever designed, built, and flew themselves. The hobby didn't just entertain kids during the space race, it trained their instincts for it, quietly in backyards and empty fields, while the real rockets were being built 90 miles away in Cape Canaveral. This is the part of the story that frankly almost never happens. Out of that bankruptcy, Estes Industries was purchased not by a faceless investment fund, but by the Langford family. John, Ellis, Fritz, and Mallory, lifelong rocketry enthusiasts who had grown up loving the exact same hobby they were now buying. Dr. John Langford, a lifelong rocketeer with deep ties to the rocketry community, took his place on the board alongside Vern Estes himself, who remarkably still serves on that board today. A company nearly erased by bankruptcy was instead handed back to people who had built rockets in their own backyards as kids, sat in lawn chairs at NAR meets, and genuinely could not imagine a version of American childhood without a cardboard rocket and a launch rod. It's rare for a story like this to end with rescue instead of erasure. The chemistry sets and the cap guns and 100 other once real childhood objects mostly faded out, hollowed into something safer and smaller. Estes didn't. It found its way back into the hands of people who refused to let it disappear. The men who built the hobby's foundation began to step back, and the business itself started moving between owners. In 1969, Vern sold the company to the Damon Corporation of Needham, Massachusetts, which also folded in Estes' smaller rival, Centuri. Over the following decades, ownership kept shifting. In 2002, longtime CEO Barry Tunick acquired the company for $15 million. In 2010, it was acquired by the hobby conglomerate Hobbico. Then, in 2018, the ground genuinely shook. Hobbico filed for bankruptcy protection in a Delaware court, and for a moment, the company that had spent 60 years quietly engineering safety into American childhoods was just an asset in a bankruptcy filing, its future entirely uncertain. It is a strange thing to realize that the maker of a toy this beloved came within a courtroom decision of simply disappearing. The hobby had survived chaos, regulation, and changing American childhoods. It had not yet had to survive its own parent company going broke. The first real friction wasn't safety, it was airspace.
Federal aviation regulations covering amateur rockets took effect in March 1963, requiring anyone launching to notify the nearest FAA air traffic control facility at least a day in advance of a launch. For decades, this stayed a manageable formality for small hobby rockets. But as the country's skies filled with more air traffic, and later with drones and tighter security restrictions, the paperwork around rocketry quietly thickened. By the 1990s, hobbyists were pushing the other direction too, wanting bigger, more powerful rockets than the original 1960s rules anticipated. In 1992, the National Association of Rocketry petitioned the FAA to more than triple the weight limit on model rockets, reflecting how far the engineering had advanced since Vern's original cardboard tubes. None of this killed the hobby, but it marked a shift. What had once been a kid grabbing a kit off a drugstore shelf and lighting it up in the backyard slowly became something that required checking weather, checking flight restrictions, and occasionally checking in with the federal government before pressing the button. For the next several decades, the hobby simply kept growing. Model rocketry became one of America's favorite pastimes, finding a home not just in backyards, but in schools and youth groups, where it was embraced as a hands-on STEM educational tool long before STEM was even a common phrase. Vern eventually sold his shares of the company after building it through the pinnacle of the space race, but stayed on as part of the board of directors, a founder who never quite let go. Competitors entered the market, most notably Century Engineering out of Phoenix, and the hobby developed its own real subculture: clubs, certifications, national meets, an actual community of enthusiasts who treated their cardboard rockets with the seriousness of any other engineering discipline. It survived the end of the space race, survived the cultural exhaustion with NASA that followed Apollo, survived corporate ownership changes as the company passed through different hands. Through all of it, the basic object stayed almost exactly the same: a cardboard tube, balsa fins, a small certified engine, and the launch rod stuck in the dirt of a field somewhere in America. Walk into a hobby shop today or just search the word Estes, and the thing that's remarkable isn't how much has changed, it's how little has. The core kit is still cardboard tube, balsa fins, a small certified engine, and the parachute. Estes still describes itself as the world leader in model rocketry, with rockets and engines that ignite the imagination of countless students and hobbyists today. Schools still use the kits to teach physics. Kids still mispronounce ejection charge. Parents still stand a respectful distance back, holding the safety key exactly as they did in 1962. And the company's reaching forward, not just back. In 2024, Estes announced a partnership with Blue Origin to build model rocket kits inspired by the real New Glenn orbital launch vehicle. The same trick Vern Estes pulled off 60 years earlier with the Redstone and the Atlas, updated for a new generation of real rockets to imitate. It is, almost uniquely among the great American childhood inventions, a story without a hollowing out. The danger was engineered away. The wonder never was. There was a moment when a generation of American kids looked up and saw a light crossing the sky that hadn't been there before, and every one of them had the same idea at once: I want to build my own way up there. For a little while, that idea was almost too dangerous to survive itself. Steel pipe, scavenged chemicals, a kitchen full of homemade fuel, and far too many kids who got lucky instead of careful. It could have ended there, the way so many backyard crazes end: in injury, in lawsuits, in a Time magazine headline, and a quiet ban. Instead, one man in Colorado built a machine that could make the dream safe without making it small. He didn't take the fire out of the hobby, he just put the fire somewhere it couldn't hurt anybody, packed it in cardboard, and sold it for $1. And for 60-some years, almost without interruption, an American kid could still walk into a field, stick a rod in the dirt, hold a button, count down from 5, and watch something they built with their own hands disappear into the sky on a column of smoke. The danger never had to be the lesson here. The safety was the invention, and somehow, against every odds a hollowed-out toy industry usually faces, nobody ever got around to ruining it. If you ever stood in a field watching your own rocket climb, you remember exactly what that felt like. Subscribe, because there's another forgotten story already on the Launchpad.